a car with a mission to impact the world of automotive racing. When presenting the Ferrari F40 to the world, Enzo Ferrari told the crowd of journalists, "I expressed my last wish to the engineers, to build a car that is the best in the world, and now the car is here." Enzo Ferrari, one of the greatest legends in automotive history, was eager to create the best sports car in the world, something pure with an analog touch, elegant design, and striking appearance. A relevant car that brought driving, power, legacy, and a unique history, a vision of speed that exploded onto the scene, set new standards, and existed in the small space between a bespoke racing machine and a road vehicle. This fire-breathing two-seater with zero comfort and no compromises still captivates the imagination of millions of fans who had a poster of it on their bedroom wall. Its unlikely commercial success surprised even its own company, becoming a top-class investment machine from the start. But have you ever wondered what makes the Ferrari F40 so special and fascinating? Launched in 1987 to celebrate Ferrari's 40th anniversary, this was the last model personally approved by Enzo himself. But why is it considered the pinnacle of supercars from the 80s and 90s? What was innovative about it? And why wasn't it perfect? In an era when Ferrari didn't care about criticism, it was a masterpiece that few understood. The F40 is for the most enthusiastic owners who desire nothing but absolute performance, said a brand executive once. So, today, the Ferrari F40, Enzo's last words. For many, the 80s were considered the brightest decade in recent times. Almost everyone who had already been born says it was the best era of all. This happens a lot because everything worked very well. All the gears in all sectors worked together. Movies like Top Gun, Rambo, and Karate Kid were all the rage. In music, Michael Jackson was dominating the global charts, while Queen was making history at Wembley Stadium with one of the most incredible and iconic concerts the world has ever seen. In Formula One, we were witnessing the retirement of Niki Lauda, one of the greatest of all time. Moreover, other gems were emerging during this same period. Alain Prost was making a lot of noise racing for McLaren. Besides the Frenchman, his biggest rival also emerged in the category at the same time, a young Brazilian named Ayrton Senna. While the automotive sector was experiencing a certain lack of creativity or a lack of innovation depending on your point of view. In short, everyone was waiting for something. In the United States, the muscle cars Mustang and Camaro were the representatives of the best available there. And in Europe, they had consolidated icons like the BMW 3 Series and the Audi Quattro, which revolutionized the market with its successful all-wheel drive model in rallying. But something was still missing. Some opportunities in the world of what are known as supercars were open. This market was not completely stagnant. At the beginning of the decade, Ferrari had launched the Testarossa, Lamborghini was at its peak with the Countach, and Porsche was developing and launching the 959 with 450 horsepower and a top speed of 317 km/h. Enthusiasts were clamoring for more. 450 horsepower was no longer enough, but the giants who could do something were not willing to create something entirely new to serve this niche. Their preferences were different, such as more economical and family-friendly cars. But the Maranello factory decided to take a risk. Ferrari would start developing a two-seater car, practically a race car, but that would be available to whoever paid for it. This decision would not be easy, as at that time the automaker was facing several difficulties due to the global recession that hit the world in 1984, which caused the number of potential brand customers to decrease, and the 328 GTB, the brand's flagship, quickly became outdated and lacked the desired power by customers, while its direct competitors, such as Porsche's 911 Turbo, had more to offer. And the pressure from Formula One worsened the situation, as the last world title in the category had been celebrated in 1979, when Jody Scheckter was champion for Scuderia and Gilles Villeneuve was the runner-up. Although the Testarossa was well received by the public, under that well-stylized 1980s chassis, the platform was quite outdated. Additionally, the competition with Porsche and Lamborghini was being fought year after year. Even though Enzo Ferrari was still at the helm of the company at 85, many people already questioned his judgment and understanding of current industry affairs and the state of the empire he had built, and a wise man once said, "Either you die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain," was looming over him. The early 1980s were marked by a turbocharger fever, and Ferrari also noted this when the brand introduced turbocharged racing cars. Despite the success in Formula 1, outside the category, the turbocharger was not as well regarded due to reliability and the infamous turbo lag, which is the delay perceived between the moment the driver accelerates and the moment the turbo boosts engine power. With this confusing market balance, Scuderia was like a blind man in a shootout, not knowing which way to go and how to develop a new, surprising, and innovative project. Until the light at the end of the tunnel appeared unexpectedly, and that's where a series of immensely interesting and dynamic races came into play and is often cited in our stories, which was a milestone in motorsport, the famous Group B. Group B was a series that was part of the WRC, World Rally Championship. This division became absurdly popular in a very short time for several reasons, being technological innovations such as the creation of all-wheel drives, which were present mainly in the Audi Quattro and the Lancia Delta Integrale HF, extreme challenges, accessibility to tests by the public, and a complete spectacle. And the cherry on top, it was deadly, both for drivers and for the crowd that gathered around the track. And at the height of the madness, being a very broad championship with practically no restrictions, there we witnessed cars with 500, 600 horsepower doing 0 to 100 in less than 3 seconds. The only homologation requirement to participate was that the competing car had to be produced in at least 200 units to qualify for the championship. The group's rules allowed the use of advanced technologies and lightweight materials, besides a very high power-to-weight ratio, which encouraged innovation and the creation of very fast and powerful cars. Initially, Ferrari paid little attention to the rally scene, but when Porsche started getting involved, the Maranello team realized they could use their turbo knowledge from Formula 1 cars to try their luck in the category. With fewer regulations, they would have a lot of ground to explore, and who knows, with the data they received, they could invest in other categories and even street cars. With this, at the end of 1982, Ferrari would begin the development of one of its models for Group B. The car chosen was the 288 GTO, and confidence in the project was high. Ferrari equipped the 288 GTO with a twin-turbo V8 engine that delivered 400 horsepower. Its top speed reached close to 290 kilometers per hour, and with that, the car was already one of the best of the time on paper. But the reality check came. Do you remember I mentioned that Group B was very dangerous? Well, in 1985, the FIA banned Group B from competitions due to a series of tragic and fatal accidents in the events. One of the most impactful was Bettega's accident, who crashed the Lancia 037. He was driving into a tree and died instantly. This was just one of several accidents that occurred between 1985 and 1986. This was a cold shower for Ferrari, which was already close to manufacturing the 200 street cars needed for its participation in the category to be authorized. So besides the expenses to enter the rally, they had already spent millions on a car that would not be promoted in any category. This caused the project to be halted. All this situation infuriated Enzo Ferrari. After all, Ferrari was spending a fortune on a car that would never compete, in addition to the problems already mentioned. After the heat of the moment passed, the engineers and those responsible began to look at that car with different eyes, and then they realized that the 288 GTO and its turbocharged V8 had shown great potential in the tests and had been able to generate exceptional performance. So Ferrari decided that the project was too good to be completely discarded. All this complicated situation coincided with Ferrari's upcoming 40th anniversary in 1987. Thus, the Italian engineers were willing to modify the 288 GTO and improve its look and performance. They would give the car a completely new appearance and name, and that frustrated Group B car would be the Italian Revenge. Ferrari's chief engineer, Nicola Materazzi, who was responsible for the construction of the 288 GTO, saw this as an opportunity to improve the original concept and make the car even faster. To everyone's surprise, the car was completed in practically a year, which was and still is a very short time for the development of a car of the level they wanted. So on July 21st, 1987, the automotive world was shocked when Ferrari revealed its new supercar in a ceremony in Milan. Named the F40, This car was the most insane ever made by the brand, and only 400 units would be produced. The F40 had that name precisely because it was a car that would commemorate the brand's 40th year. And it was an aggressive, wild car, a unique design, elegant and representative. A car with a large fixed rear wing, sharp front, very wide arches, and air intakes as large as. Even before its launch, the Ferrari sports car underwent rigorous durability tests, including covering thousands of kilometers on racetracks to ensure its robustness, reliability, and improved handling. With all this, the reality was one. The F40 was a race car that would be in the hands of the population. The audience was ecstatic, and the Italian machine immediately became world news. Newspapers and magazines stamped Enzo's new creation. The twin-turbo V8 engine present in the 288 GTO was now in the F40 and was improved. The power went from the original 400 horsepower to 478 horsepower. The 0 to 100, which was previously around 5 seconds, was reduced to something closer to 4 seconds. The top speed, which was 290 kilometers per hour, had a considerable increase, jumping to an incredible 325 kilometers per hour and being the first production car to surpass 320 kilometers per hour. Rear-wheel drive, but with a slightly centralized engine. In summary, Ferrari had created a monster, something that could really be considered an anniversary launch. Of course, the criticisms would also come, starting with the price. The new F40 was launched at a surprising price of $400,000 in 1987. That value today would be around $1,100,000. And there was more. Internally, the car had no comfort, or at least not the expected when paying for those values. The body was made of a combination of Kevlar, a material found in bulletproof vests, and carbon fiber, reinforced with plastic and aluminium. The F40 had no electronic steering assists, such as traction control or ABS brakes. Nothing within sight was in vain. Every aspect of the F40's design has a specific function. For example, the large air intakes and outlets were designed to optimize airflow and cool the twin-turbo V8 engine. The goal was to create a car as rigid as possible without compromising the final weight of the car, which is why many luxuries were left out, including electronic assists, an air conditioning system, and even a radio. Another curious fact, only a thin layer of classic red paint was applied to the car from the factory, all this seeking the final weight. Plexiglass, a type of plastic that is as strong as glass, replaced the standard glass in the rear cover where the engine was located for the same purpose. There was minimal internal insulation, and the F40 was designed not to have a luggage compartment. Another curious fact about the F40 is that due to the massive power and lack of electronic aids, Ferrari needed a specific tire to provide enough grip for the car. That's when Pirelli stepped in and delivered a special blend that was both grippy and durable and street legal. Besides all this, many people complained about how uncomfortable the car was. Professional drivers were used to it, but people who drove normal cars surely wouldn't find it the most comfortable thing in the world. And while with all these negative aspects, it was obvious that not everyone would be happy. Ferrari purists questioned the brand for not having a naturally aspirated V12, and some even criticized that the F40's launch was an act of desperate self-promotion, as it made no sense to produce a machine that at the time contained flaws for legal street use, without comfort or only for some series of races in which the car could compete. Others suggested that the car was a masterpiece, a rough gem full of driving pleasures, and yes, to put the car in the hands of customers, make them really feel the car and the excitement of driving something similar to what was on the tracks, and also to compete with the newly launched Porsche 959, which had all-wheel drive but was much more technologically advanced and more refined. Even with this controversial side, and that generates debates to this day, the F40 was a certain success with positive points. The demand for the car was huge, and the initial 400 units soon turned into 1,311 units. Originally, the idea with the Ferrari F40 was not to prioritize it on the racetracks. Still, as the Scuderia's phase was not the best, the Italians opted to seek to recover some of their glory days that were already becoming a thing of the past. So, they decided to turn that car into a machine for very high performance, and that's where the development of the F40 LM came in. As the name suggested, the car would have specifications oriented towards the Endurance Championship and also for the 24 Hours of Le Mans test, but the cars would end up competing in various other categories besides European endurance. Of course, they made modifications to the F40 LM, which went through an increase in power, reaching 480 horsepower. Besides the engine, the car lost weight and received improvements in suspension, brakes, transmission, and other components. The F40 LM's first race participation was across the Atlantic in 1989, where it competed in the IMSA's GTO class at the famous Laguna Seca circuit, and the result of that race was impressive for a debuting team, a third place. The fact became even more impressive because the F40 LM was built around the chassis of street cars, while most high-level GTO cars built for racing in IMSA were based on racing chassis. Unfortunately, the only car competing in IMSA retired in the next race, but it showed that it could make an impact on a luckier day. The car returned to IMSA the following year and had more success. The car managed to reach the podium a few times, but unfortunately, they never managed to climb to the top step. Years later, Ferrari tried their luck in European and Japanese championships. In Japan, the Ferrari F40 LM managed to win the last race of the 1994 season in the JGTC, Japanese Grand Touring Championship. That year's championship had only 5 races contested, and Ferrari won one of those events, which meant a 20% win rate, which was definitely not bad, but not totally relevant due to the small number of races. Meanwhile, in Europe, Ferrari achieved 2 victories, one of them in the 4 Hours of Vallelunga and another Grand Prix in Italy in 1996. It's worth noting that all this was achieved before the perfect car appeared and made an immediate impact in the world of endurance. Which perfect car is that? I'll tell you soon. These may have been the high points of the F40 in the world of competitions, but still, Ferrari launched one last model of this iconic car, the F40 Competizione. The car was not really different from the F40 LM, sharing the extensive aerodynamic and chassis dynamic changes to create the original F40 LM. However, the Competizione was the ultimate version of the F40. The car boasted the same twin-turbo V8 of 2.9 liters as the F40 and F40 LM, with 691 horsepower, propelling it to a top speed of around 370 kilometers per hour, impressive even by today's standards. As for the 0 to 100 of this car, Ferrari does not disclose it to this day. If you look at the brand's website, the 0 to 100 is blank. Anyway, this F40 is the rarest and only 32 units were produced. After all these attempts to make the F40 a victorious car in the world of competitions, and for many critics, Ferrari partially failed in achieving its goal. The F40 remained in history for its aggressive lines, its pure mode of being, completely analog in several aspects, and without any concern for comfort. Ferrari was Ferrari, known as Enzo Ferrari's last work. It left its mark and importance in the world of automobiles, and although much questioned at the time by the Tifosi and deceased in 1988, it reproduced another historic symbol of the prancing horse and changed the future. Its successor, the Ferrari F50, raised the F40 standards and had a very clear goal: to be a Formula One car for the streets, just as today the Mercedes AMG 1 is for the Silver Arrows. The engine was a naturally aspirated 4.7-liter V12 with 513 horsepower, 6-speed transmission, and a top speed of 325 kilometers per hour. The 0 to 100, 3.8 seconds. At the time, it stood alongside the F40 itself and other extremely formidable competitors such as the Jaguar XJ220, Bugatti EB110, and McLaren F1 as the fastest cars produced. In total, 349 units were produced, making the F50 even rarer than the F40, and looking back, after the F40 model, the F50 found a balance between performance and luxury, making advances in both directions, trying not to sacrifice either. And when we say that many times a car leaves a legacy, the F40 did that, because since then, the refined luxury supercars of the Italian giant can match the expectation when you press the accelerator. But they can also take you home after a day at the racetrack while listening to your favorite songs on the multimedia center and enjoying the air conditioning. And if we could describe what the Ferrari F40 was in a few words, it would be, to hell with the critics, I am purely legendary. Well, that's exactly what the F40 is and represents to this day in the global automotive scene. And remember, I mentioned the perfect car earlier? Well, I've already talked about it here in the video, but maybe you missed it. On one side we had the F40, the protagonist of the video, but within another Formula 1 team, we had a car created at a bar table that ended up becoming the greatest legend in motorsport, the famous perfect car. Do the following, get comfortable on the couch, on the bed, because this video is good and impossible not to like. See you soon.